Coming up on Leading the Charge.
And how many fuel filters are on the POWR2?
Yeah, there's no filters.
Start with the fuel filter, the air filter, and
Tim, how many consumables are on the POWR2? How many things do you require your users to replace every 3 months or 3,000 miles?
Really isn't anything other than the forced air filters. And yeah, the ones that were used at Burning Man needed to be changed often. But in a regular event, really nothing needs to be done.
This is Leading the Charge, where we talk innovation and insights in the industry of sustainable energy. Leading the Charge is brought to you by POWR2, a global provider of energy storage solutions. Let's simplify sustainability. And now, from the POWR2 studio and broadcasting everywhere from leadingthecharge.io, here are your hosts, Tim Doling and Kevin Sturmer. Hello and welcome to Leading the Charge, where we talk about battery energy storage insights, innovation, and the industry of sustainable energy. My name is Kevin, and I work in the marketing department of a company called POWR2. And with us, as always, is our fantastic co-host, the incredible Tim Doling. He is the Director of Innovation here at POWR2. A quick hello to you, Tim, because we have a jam-packed episode talking about all things temporary power at live events. And we are lucky enough to be joined by a panel of absolute experts in this field. We have Neel Vasavada, Sean Jacobs, and Richard Cadena joining us on the podcast. Thank you all for being here.
My pleasure.
Good to be here.
Now, for those who might not know, Neel has experience in both green energy and live entertainment and is the founder of a company called Overdrive, and they work with clients to make sustainable energy easy and affordable. Sean works with Neel and is the lead designer at Overdrive, and he also has many credits to his name, including the touring tech and set carpenter for Roger Waters of Pink Floyd fame, as you might know. Richard is an author, a freelance lighting designer, an ETCP recognized trainer, and ETCP certified entertainment electrician, as well as the founder of the Academy of Production and Technology. Some great resumes all around. Let's get to know you. First, let's start with Neel. How did you get started with green energy, live entertainment, and what ignited your passion to form Overdrive?
Well, my career kind of led me to here. I have a background in hybrid electric vehicle development. I started at the University of Wisconsin back in 1994, working with hybrid electric vehicles. And I went on to start a vehicle control systems company where we worked with Tesla, Zero Electric Motorcycles, the U.S. Department of Energy, and a number of other companies doing data acquisition and control systems. I was asked to help in a business development role with a company that was providing equipment for large stadium shows and music festivals around 2012, right in the wake of the Great Recession. So I stepped in to help and ended up working in that field, doing both things for about a decade. During the pandemic, there wasn't much for shows, and I was speaking with some of my contacts at the U.S. Department of Energy about where technology had evolved. And it sure seemed to me that we could handle the loads that I see at the shows that we do, and that we didn't have to be burning diesel like we had been. So we started working on it in, I'd say, 2020, and we did our first sort of test activation in early 2023. And in just one short year, we've become the largest provider of temporary sustainable energy systems in live events. There's companies with more gear, there's companies with more resources, but in terms of large, successful, high impact, highly visible shows, Overdrive has now done, quite a few of them, and it's growing every day.
Fantastic. And thank you for being here. Sean, let's talk a little bit about your career, how you got started, and eventually how you met Neel and joined Overdrive.
Sure. Yeah. So I actually got a master's degree in electrical engineering, specializing in manufacturing of high efficiency solar cells. And in that while I was doing my master's, I kind of fell into being a touring technician for Roger Waters. And that's a different story for another time. But I had the idea. I experienced also independently that the technology was kind of finally there to really shift gears on how we power events with the advent of LED everything now. You know, the loads have dropped significantly. Class D amplifiers, like. So I said, the only way we're really going to know if we can do this is if we really know what we're consuming. So independently, on the Roger Waters tour, I started to monitor and log every department's consumption at every show. And I started to get all of this data and learning that we actually didn't need generators a number of times when the building didn't have enough power for us. So some people and some nonprofits found out what I was doing, and they connected me with Neel, saying, "Oh, we should talk." And that's when I met Neel and told him what I was doing, and he liked my background, and I liked what he was doing, and I said, "Wait, this is a match made in heaven. This is perfect."
It sounds like a great fit. And then, Richard, I've seen your work in lighting design, and it is fantastic. With that, what do you love about that? And also, what do you love about teaching and inspiring this new generation based on your experience?
What's not to love? I mean, I have a lot of experience, and being able to share it with new people coming in, there's nothing more rewarding than when you share your knowledge, and then you get the fruits of that later on when people send you emails and letters saying, "Hey, you helped me get a lighting design job on Broadway," or "You helped me get on this big tour," or whatever. So it's just, it's really rewarding to be able to go out and work in field, take that knowledge and experience, and then share it with other people.
That's so wonderful. I'm impressed by all of you. And then somehow you all, connected together. Last summer, Billie Eilish and Reverb wanted to do a full set at Lollapalooza that was sustainable, powered by, a solar array. What brought that together? Can you talk a little bit about planning that and then making that such a success?
I've been doing this presentation that I call Protect the Stage. And it's designed to raise awareness about the hazards of using electricity on stages. Some people have been fatally electrocuted, so I tried to prevent that from happening. So I did that presentation at the Event Safety Alliance at the Safety Summit. I think that's where Neel and I connected, because I think he saw that, and then we talked afterwards. And, you talk to a lot of people, and sometimes it goes somewhere, sometimes it doesn't. But this happened to work out, and I love what Neel and Overdrive is doing. And, it's just so wonderful to be able to, again, take this information and apply it in ways that have never been applied before. And it's kind of cutting edge. So I think that's how we got together. Isn't that right, Neel?
That's right. And I think one thing to highlight about both Sean and Richard and myself is that one of the reasons why things are moving forward in our little group here is we're a happy accident, but we're the accident that needed to happen. We, in the temporary power world, there aren't a lot of engineers. If you think about it, all of the traditional companies that you go to rent generators are technician companies. They get hardware from third parties like POWR2, and then they deploy them. At the same time, the hardware developers, they aren't always aware of all the use cases and all the little nuances that the gear that they're building is going to, because they're not actually the primary users. By having Sean and myself and Richard and our partner Boxer, we have a very diverse group of skills. Both Sean and I are people with engineering degrees that know our way around a toolbox. We can swing hammers and just as well as we can do calculus. That's not a common skill these days. And sometimes in order to push innovation forward and to make change, you need these sort of oddball skill sets, which is something that I think we have, in droves.
That's so great to hear. People coming together, bringing their specific skills together to make something maybe greater than they could have individually. It's always a nice thing to see. What was the planning process like for Lollapalooza there? How many solar panels did you use? How many power banks did you use? I mean, you were powering so much on that stage. And then I think I even read that there was power left over after that. So what exactly went into that?
There was a lot. So first of all, we didn't do the whole show. There's a lot of skepticism, a lot of concerns. And the only thing that we were allowed to do was what's called the floor package, which is the stuff that was used for Billie Eilish's show and no one else's. So that was, I believe, a 400 amp service, 4 200 amp services, and 1 100 amp service. To give you guys and your audience an idea, the whole stage, the whole show might have 8 of these 400s, So we maybe all said and done powered about a third of the show. As far as preparation and everything, there was none.
That was the hardest part because it was hard to get information. And, we had, in a perfect world, you have pre-production and you have equipment lists, you have the lighting plot and everything you're going to be powering. And then you can build a spreadsheet and you can add up all the loads and you can figure out how much power you need. And then look at the run schedule and figure out how much energy you need. Well, we had none of that. We were kind of shooting from hip. So we're kind of throwing a dart a little bit. And it worked out well, but it's really nail biting too, not having all the information.
So that's not necessarily a bad thing, because a big strength of electrification and of the sorts of hardware that we're using, like POWR2, is it's very flexible. Right? We can compensate on site very, very well, much better than diesel. So part of the success of Billie Eilish was we knew we were walking into a low information situation. So what we did from the get-go was design everything from the solar to the POWR2 units that we used to even how we set up the wire and everything, so that we'd have as many options as we could on site to make it work the way we needed it to.
And that's the reality when you're breaking new ground. You're doing something new that really hasn't been done a lot. There's not a benchmark out there to look to. You're the ones who are basically setting the benchmark. And what's also lost a lot of times on people is they rely a lot on diesel. They think that's very reliable because they've used it and it's worked before. And then there's this new technology called a battery energy storage system. And what they don't realize is diesel has a lot of moving parts with it and a lot of possibility for breakdown. There aren't any moving parts in a battery energy storage system. It's not only is it scalable and silent, it's very reliable. So can you talk a little bit about that, the reliability factor in your experience?
Well, I'll start, but Sean, I think Sean can also give some insight. First of all, they're simply more inherently reliable than diesel generators, full stop. The only advantage that a diesel generator has is that you can refuel it in, say, 10 minutes versus, it could take 10 hours to recharge. So in any situation where refilling the tank is not the biggest concern, you could be more reliable using a battery inverter system like a POWR2 than a diesel generator, and more sustainable and safer and easier. I go on these sort of podcasts and stuff all the time. And as an engineer, I say that the main impediment to adoption is culture. It's not technology. How many moving parts are there in a POWR2? Let's count. There's 2 cooling fans. There's 4 doors. So they have hinges on them. Okay. So we're up to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 2 cooling fans, a bunch of hinges. That's everything that moves and can wear out on a POWR2. Where do you want to start with the diesel engine?
And how many fuel filters are on the POWR2?
Yeah, there's no filters.
Start with the fuel filter, the air filter, and
Tim, how many consumables are on the POWR2? How many things do you require your users to replace every 3 months or 3,000 miles?
Really isn't anything other than the forced air filters. And yeah, the ones that were used at Burning Man needed to be changed often, but in a regular event, really nothing needs to be done.
Yeah, when we were at Lollapalooza, they had to do a couple of oil changes on the generators that were right next to us, and there was a bunch of oil spilled on the ground, and big mess. That was amusing.
So I had a question on that, on the generators. So if you're running a stage and there's lots of different artists, but only one of them has asked for battery energy storage, how does the rest of the stage get fired up? Is it just with diesel generators?
Yeah, they had a large twin pack running the entire time to run all of the stage video, lighting, PA, and that runs at 480 volt with transformers under the stage at various locations. And then there was another set of breakouts where we plugged in our equipment that was meant for what's called guest services, which is all the stuff that the artist brings in their trucks that gets plugged in separately.
Gotcha. Thanks for that.
So what was interesting actually is in the days before the show, as they were setting everything up and we had our solar panels out in the field charging our batteries, that generator was running the entire time. The generator that's designed to run the entire stage, it was running day and night. And when we came in the morning, the fuel truck came in, and I just casually inquired, how much fuel did you add? And they added 100 gallons in 24 hours, literally powering nothing, just a couple motors here and there running up and down. And this is an amazing immediate opportunity for battery hybrid systems where you could easily run all of the gear for the days leading up to an event on a battery, on a single POWR2, for example. And then you could swap it over to the generator if you didn't trust the right battery system for all the larger loads.
And that's just a quick, immediate win that people could have.
Immediate.
I mean, when you're talking about reliability too, think about this for a second. They start the generators and they leave them running for 5 or 6 days because they're nervous that if they shut them off, they won't restart. That's the current paradigm. I mean, it's almost ridiculous if you think about it.
But at the same time, when you run a generator at 10% load for days, you're actually damaging the generator more than if you were running it at 70, 80% load. So this is another benefit where direct hybridization is an easy win, where you don't run your generator until you need to recharge your batteries, and then you run it at 80% load for a couple hours.
Yeah, you don't get wet stacking with batteries.
So just think about that for a second. If people want their generators to be more reliable, they should be buying Tim's products. That actually makes your generator more reliable.
Of course, I would agree with that, Neel.
But isn't that, think about that. When I say it's cultural, folks, think about this. There's a perception when something goes down, they look at you and they say, it must be the new stuff. When the new stuff here actually makes the old stuff more reliable. That's culture. That's not engineering. That's education.
Now, there was a bit of a challenge just in terms of sizing the system. Again, because we never got to do rehearsals with the equipment that they were bringing on stage, we didn't really know what the loads were. So we have to go with their requests for a 200 amp, 200 amp, 208 volt, 3-phase service, 200 amp here, 400 amp here, and 100 amp. So we have to be able to provide that much power. And then assessing how much battery capacity we need, we have to assume some percentage of load for some amount of time of the show. And all of these are just back of the envelope calculations because they never let us actually measure anything. Now, during the rehearsals, once they loaded everything in, we asked the lighting designer, turn everything on to 100%. We asked the video department, turn your video on full bright, full white, 100%. Let's see what actually happens. And this was before the show, so we could actually do some testing. I forget the exact numbers, but they were nowhere near. I think we maybe stressed one of the systems a little bit, but really they were nowhere near the limits, especially the audio, especially the special effects. We had a 100 amp service for the toaster, which is this rapid elevator basically that shoots Billy up into the air in the beginning of the show. That's the only thing that service, 100 amp service, was being used for, to run that one toaster. And We tested it. You couldn't even see the load on it because it was too fast. It was basically running a small compressor to build up pressure and then an actuator to release it. And it happened so quickly that you couldn't see the load on it. And now to say, okay, we need a separate 100 amp service for this. What I discovered on the Roger Waters tour when I was measuring every department's power consumption, for example, the lighting department requested a 400 amp service for stage left and a 400 amp service for stage right. They never drew more than 100 amps. So when you come to a situation where you can't provide that much power, you have to think more cleverly, like, okay, well, why don't we combine this and this together? Because we know now with the data, we're never going to go over these limits. So there's a lot of more, like, again, once you have the information, you can do more clever engineering about the sharing, but it's not something that touring technicians are comfortable doing yet.
We did eventually get some, an equipment list very late in the game, and I put together a spreadsheet and calculated all the wattages, and it turned out, if you add them all up, it worked out to be something like 325 amps. So they were justified. That's for the lighting floor package. So they were justified in asking for a 400 amp three-phase service. However, you never turn everything on full at one time.
To give you guys some numbers, the total amount of the stored energy that was used was 6.6%. So as far as battery charge, they used nothing. Okay? The total amount of power, the maximum, the percentage of the maximum power that they used was 8%. So although we did push one of the units in testing, during the show, it never got even near. The lighting service hit 20% at one point. So the lighting service at one point used 1/5 of what was spec'd. And then in terms of current draw, that lighting service actually did draw 26% on one of the three legs. But as you see here, we were using a fraction of what the specified energy was. And so, yes, we could have chosen to do, we could have done all of the headliner sets, or we could have done all of Billy's equipment on stage. We had a lot of over capability. And another thing to think about this, folks, is that that's cost, right? So the upfront cost of this, knowing what was needed, probably could have been half, if not a third. And we don't have any numbers for fuel savings, but I'm willing to bet, this activation was actually cost competitive with what they were doing for diesel generators if they looked at all the other costs involved. Distro is a whole other thing we could talk about too.
And that's interesting to see, like, now that we have some hard data to look at and we can better understand the peak loads. I mean, you were mentioned testing at 100%, but understanding, exactly what is the peak load, what is the average load, what is being consumed. And as you said, I think it comes down to saving money. There are definitely challenges. Can you talk about getting them to just show up at a live event, the battery energy storage systems? What's involved in just getting people to rely on them from the get-go?
Well, I think the problem simply is a lack of familiarity. So the conversation we need to move toward is we have a regulatory history with diesel generators. Every fire marshal, every building inspector knows what they're looking for with diesel generators. What we've been running into a little bit more and more is as this new gear shows up on the site, the regulatory officials take a look at them and say, well, what codes, what standards do these meet? They need to meet standards and codes. And so far, when you have open-minded inspectors, it's not hard to look at this and say, I'd rather be standing next to that than a diesel generator. There's less of a chance of that being a safety issue than this diesel generator. But there's also people who follow the letter of the law, and there is no law that has been written for these things. So that, I think, is the challenge, is helping people who are tasked with applying certain laws, regulations, and standards to deal with gear when such laws, regulations, and standards haven't been fully developed yet.
And Richard, I know you've been part of writing some specific pieces of code in the past that are industry related. Are there any specific articles or pieces that you could see that would be referenced if somebody's using a battery energy storage system?
Sure. The batteries themselves, there's a UL standard 1973, and that tests the batteries for various things. But basically, are they going to explode or are they not going to explode? That kind of thing, the batteries themselves. And then there is UL 9540, which is how everything's packaged. And that has to do with wiring gauge, the spacing of the terminals. Is it going to arc? Is it going to catch fire? Is it not? Is there a shock hazard? Are the parts guarded? Those kinds of things. And is it protected from the environment? And then, of course, 9540A, UL 9540A is more to do with the thermal runaway and the fire hazard. So fire marshals are typically interested in 9540A. Electrical inspectors will be looking for 9540. And although I have to say in my experience, because all this is new technology, a lot of them are not up to speed. So it's really incumbent on us to guide them. And that's the big challenge, is trying to get them to understand what they're looking for. And, if they applied the same standards to portable power generators, they would find that they're kind of in the same situation because they don't understand what the standards are. And what you'll find out is a lot of the diesel generators are not listed. So, but they've been around for so long, they're just kind of accepting. But those are really the biggest challenges that I encountered.
And there was something we talked about, the National Electric Code, Article 520.10. Does that ring a bell from the,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So part of the issue at Lollapalooza was that the electrical inspector pointed out that the enclosure was not weatherized. And I tried as politely as I could. I brought up Article 520.10, and Article 520.10 says that it's okay to use equipment that is not first or outdoor use as long as it's supervised by qualified personnel while it's energized and it's buried from the general public. And you met all that criteria. However, the electrical inspector said, we don't go by the National Electrical Code. And I said, well, what do you go by? He said, we go by the Chicago Code. And I said, well, isn't there something in the Chicago Code that is similar to that? And the answer was, I didn't know. Now, later, after the event was over, I went and looked it up, and it turns out, of course, the Chicago Code is based on the National Electrical Code. They're not going to reinvent the wheel. They're not going to rewrite the entire code. So they take the NEC and they modify it, they adapt it, and they can add to it or take away from it. But in the end, the Chicago Code also has the exact same verbiage with the exact same article. It's 520.10. And it says the exact same thing. So, that's just something that you typically encounter in festivals like this when you have gear that's not listed for outdoor use. However, the thing that makes it safe is that people like Sean and Neel are always there. You don't abandon gear. We're there to keep people away. And also it is behind it's backstage. So the general public is not going to just wander by and stick their finger or their tongue in an electrical socket that's on the EA. So that's really what makes it safe.
Yeah, well, it's a question for you, Richard, really. There seems to me to be some contradiction between standards. 9540A says anything over 50 kilowatt hours needs to have full 9540A testing. And then when I go over to NFPA 855, it says anything over 20 kilowatt hours has to have full 9540A and 9540 testing. So how do you reconcile the standards and get everybody on the same page when there's a certain amount of confusion there?
Yeah, well, ultimately it's up to the authority having jurisdiction, or the AHJ. And the code there's lots of contradictions in the code, and it just depends on how it's interpreted. And this is part of why there is a lot of effort right now to clarify these issues. there are, I know as at least 2 or 3 different efforts, including ESTA, which is the Entertainment Services Technology Association, is looking at writing a recommended practice for the use of energy storage systems. And these are the kinds of things that will clarify those questions, because they're still questions. Nobody knows the answers to those questions, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's interesting. And my follow-up question to that is, okay, so if I have to get approval on something over 50 kilowatt hours, what if I just limit the size of my power bank to 50 kilowatt hours and have multiple of them on one site? Do I still have to get approval, or am I circumnavigating that requirement? So I guess there's no real answer to that unless you have any thoughts.
The answer, well, I think one of the answers is you need to find out who the regulator is and speak with them ahead of time. So we actually dealt with this last weekend in Texas at an event. And what was interesting is that fire marshal said 20 kilowatt hours max, and they have to be 3 feet apart. And it has to be UL 9540A. So we had batteries that were in steel cabinets that were UL 9540A. Now, let's be clear, there was nothing special about these cabinets except that the manufacturer had gotten them UL listed. It was a very simple stamped steel piece. But they were 20 kilowatt hours. The cabinets usually hold 36 kilowatt hours. Take out 2 batteries, put multiple cabinets 3 feet apart. It's done. Now, here's the thing, is that 20 kilowatt hour mattered to that fire inspector, but the UL 9540 full system compliance didn't. So at the end of the day, it's actually, I would caution against just trying to follow the regulation, because you don't know which part they are going to ask for. Well, I think the best thing to do is to familiarize yourself with NFPA and UL regulations and go in there knowledgeable with, what they'll let you do and what they won't.
That's so interesting. And the thing that gets me on 9540A, it's not a pass or fail criteria. It's a test method, and they give you an evaluation at the end of it saying, if it does catch fire, this is what you can expect. So it's really a guidebook for the fire departments what to do if there's a problem, rather than actually a safety certificate for a piece of equipment. So I think there's a lot of confusion there.
Well, Tim, they did use it like that, because that spacing requirement, that 3-foot spacing requirement, the fire marshal let us know that after they had seen the 9548. So they do take information from that test data and use it to guide us. But you're right, it is not a pass-fail.
I think also the 9540 system it really came about for things that are attached to a building and live there permanently. So in case something happens, the building doesn't all burn down. But in a temporary application where we're out in some remote field somewhere, it's kind of irrelevant as long as the system is away from people. And if it does, God forbid, catch fire in some crazy situation, which we all know is nearly impossible with LFP batteries, lithium iron phosphate, then it's like maybe the 9540 actually as a system doesn't matter. And the regulations and rules need to understand the purpose of things. And that's going to be an issue moving forward for sure for event space.
Yeah,
for temporary generator replacements.
So just the final point I was going to make was that temporary mobile generators are not covered by the same regulations as permanent installed generators on a building. And that's how they get around a lot of these requirements on an event or a job site. Whereas the same is not holding true for the UL regulations for batteries. So we're held to a much different standard. So I think there's going to be a period of time where we look into all this and it becomes aligned with what the other standards are for generators. So I'm hoping that comes along.
Well, Tim, this is where culture kind of creeps into it again. Guess what's not on any of the generators? And we have gone and looked. What's not on any of the generators at the concert sites we're going to?
There's no UL marks.
Nothing.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking, there is nothing. And I looked into it a bit more, and it's questionable whether these things are UL listed in the first place, because they have to be UL listed in that mobile application. And when there's modifications or anything done, they lose the UL listing. And I got to tell you, man, I'm very skeptical if a lot, if not the majority of temporary generators out there coming from large rental companies are actually UL compliant the way that, a lot of the fire inspectors are assuming they are.
Yeah, they use that mobile exemption. If it's a temporary mobile generator. It doesn't need to be UL listed is the assumption they're taking. So whilst I don't necessarily disagree with it, it does bug me that we have to follow the rules, but nobody else does.
So what happens when NFPA 80 requires it to be UL 9548? Does that exemption, I don't think the exemption crosses over between standard agencies. So does, now we got other problems.
Yeah, well, the way to resolve the problems is people in the industry need to go and get on the code, get the NFPA code writing community and write the code the way it should be. And that requires a lot of time, energy, resources, and a lot of times it's done by either manufacturers or companies that are using
Richard, can you talk a little bit more about that? I just wanted to also mention on this entire topic of temporary power and live events, Richard, you've written an article that's coming out this spring in Protocol Magazine. It's called Shadow, Light, and Truth, Standards for Battery Energy Storage Systems. But can you go a little deeper on that? Somebody wants to go ahead and write a new code or get something into the system. What's the process? Do they form a committee? How does this all come to be?
Yeah, sure. So there's a couple of different ways to do that. One is to get on the code writing panel for the NFPA 70, which is the National Electrical Code. And you go to these meetings and you basically, you write drafts to modifying the code the way you see fit, and it goes through all the committee, and they kind of guide the code the way they think it should be. People like Steve Cherry from ETC have been doing that for years. Alan Rowe, who used to be the president of Local 728 in Burbank, and a couple of other people, like Hans Lau, who owns Dadco, owns the Dadco, and Juan Dalkus, have spent a lot of time rewriting the Article 530, which is for motion picture television studios in some locations. And they do that because the code, after a while, it gets out of date and it needs to be updated. And it hasn't been that way for a long time. It hasn't been updated in a long time. So they just, for the 2024 edition, I think it is, they rewrote Article 530 as a 2023. And then another way to do it is to go through the Entertainment Services Technology Association, or ESTA. They are an ANSI writing, the ANSI standard body. So all the codes they write, all the standards they write, become American National Standards Institute standards. And so what happens is if you go and volunteer for that and you write a standard, you can write, for example, recommended practice for battery energy storage systems, and it becomes an ANSI standard. And that's something that will then be referenced by the NFPA 70 to help guide them in writing their code. So those are the two ways that I know of to shape how the code is written and how it's adapting, how it's enforced.
Wonderful. And thank you so much. And as sort of we wind down here, what's next for everybody on the panel? What's coming up for Overdrive? What's next for you, Richard? What's coming up?
Well, for Overdrive, we're doing more and bigger shows. So just stay tuned. We just finished South by Southwest, the largest sustainable energy activation they've ever had. That's a pretty major American music industry and tech industry event. We just did the second Luck reunion. We just confirmed Google I/O, which is one of their largest corporate events. And there's going to be a lot more. So, yeah, we're excited.
You mentioned Luck, so that's a repeat business or repeat event. So it's obviously working well for the customer.
Tim, every single client that we worked with last year so far who is having the event again has asked us to come back.
That's fantastic.
So hopefully, it makes it a lot. It's definitely validating.
Yeah, and Sean and Neel were mostly at South by Southwest. I was mostly at Luck. And I'll tell you, this year was so much easier because we knew exactly what to expect. We knew what the loads were going to be. We knew what the runtimes were going to be. And it was so much easier this year than last. But you asked me what I'm up to. I'm going to go work with Overdrive Energy Solutions at Google I/O. But I'm also working on the fourth edition of my book, which is Electricity for Entertainment Electricians and Technicians. And guess what? It's going to have some information about battery energy storage systems on it.
Thank you so much. And where can people find you online? What's the website?
Our website is www.overdrive.rocks. Look up Overdrive Energy Solutions on your favorite social media network. You can find us there.
And Richard, where can people go to find more information about you and what you're doing?
Yeah, so my website is aptxl.com. And by the way, I do have some training classes coming up in Atlanta and Dallas and some other locations.
Fantastic. And as we wrap up, we usually end the episodes with some questions for Tim. So just one question today as it relates to temporary storage. When you're renting a battery energy storage system for a live event or really any application, what are the pieces of information that someone might want to know before starting the rental process?
Kevin, I'd feel bad trying to answer that question with the professionals on the phone today. For me, it would be knowing the load profile, knowing how long you can run it for, having that equipment list like Richard referred to earlier. But we do understand that's not always possible to get. So it's having your best guess at what equipment is on there. So Sean or Richard or Neil, any of you three could chime in on that one.
Communication is the key. Get in early, get as much information as you can. But yeah, if you can know your loads and your run times, then you're golden.
Also, any supplemental power that's available is nice to know, whether you have a generator, whether you have solar, or whether you even have some grid power and you can throttle it down if your load is bigger than what the grid can sustain.
And that makes a lot of sense. Get some real world data that you can, work toward, or at least set some sort of benchmark. And with that, I want to say thank you. And whatever platform you're on, if you're listening, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, leave a review if you can, and do all of those good things. If you want to learn more about the podcast, head over to leadingthecharge.io. We'll have show notes here, links for everybody, all of our guests, and the people in the legal team want me to say that any statements or views expressed by the hosts or guests on Leading the Charge are entirely their own and do not necessarily reflect the opinions or positions of POWR2, their partners, or affiliates. Thank you, everyone, for your time. It has been really great talking to you.
Thanks for having us.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Much appreciated.
Thank you so much. And finally, I know that your time is valuable, and we appreciate you spending even a little bit of that time with us. So let's simplify sustainability and keep leading the charge toward a world powered by sustainable energy. See you next time.